to another What is a Spiritism Online Study with us here at Light in the Shire Spiritist Group. We will be reviewing tonight the first part of the dialogue of Kardec with the priest. So we moved on to the third dialogue, and we'll be reviewing pages 122 to 126. Can you see my screen, Flo?
No, I can't. No, that's what I'm doing. So that's where.
Let's try again.
I can see you now, but I couldn't see your screen.
Can you
see now? Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
We wanted. I just needed to start again.
Yeah, better. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so we continue with Kardec's dialogues with different visitors that came to the Spirit Society of Paris, I guess, back in the 1869. And so this was a priest, so a representative of the church that started this dialogue with Kardec. So our previous class, just for those who missed it, is actually uploaded onto YouTube, and it's talking about the prohibition against Spiritism. So it was another of the interesting questions about how would it work if the government or some authority tried to prohibit people from studying and learning Spiritism. So we discussed that with William. And yeah, so we start the third dialogue. So I think before we go on to the actual dialogue, in the beginning of the dialogue, I wanted to acknowledge, like, Kardec was such a wise man. He was definitely the common sense incarnated, as he got nicknamed in Spiritism. He started off talking to the priest by saying, because the priest was like, oh, can I ask you a few questions? And Kardec was like, yes, of course. But before you ask any questions, I wanted to just explain that.
Can I just say that the PowerPoint's not showing? You are.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
Just be aware.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I have to do it again every time I click. I don't know what happened. Okay. Can you see it now?
It's black.
Oh. Okay. Interesting. Because it shows a red thing here as if I was sharing the screen.
If you put like a start to a sliding show, something like that. I can see you now again.
Yeah, cancel the sharing. Can you see now?
Yes. It looks like too big. It doesn't fit on my screen. I'm not sure if it would fit in a...
Oh, I see the full screen here.
Yeah, and I see just part of it.
Okay. Well, we'll focus on the content.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Kardec, he basically starts the conversation with the priest by saying, before I answer you, I just wanted to clarify what we're here to do and what we're not here to do. So he says, I am here to discuss, the ideas of Spiritism, answer any questions you have about the philosophy itself, the main principles, but I am not here to convert you into Spiritism. And then he starts reviewing some of the main concepts of why Spiritism wouldn't do that. So I'm just gonna go back because I think, yeah, this went up. Can you see the screen still?
I can see part of it. I think I'm watching from an iPhone, so maybe on a computer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Or maybe I try to connect to a computer. Keep going. Yeah.
No worries. No, keep going. So he starts saying, like, look, the biggest goal of Spiritism is to combat disbelief and all the consequences that can lead when people don't believe that there is a soul and there is future life. So, like we've been discussing in other classes, I guess, when we were reviewing different parts of the book, if people don't believe that they have a future life, it changes the way that they might face life. When they get a big problem, they might be, thinking that maybe they should take their lives, or, oh, it's the end of my existence now, this happened. So when we understand there is future life, and the soul exists and the spirit lives past the material matter, is the biggest, I guess, kind of freedom that Spiritism gives us from the day-to-day materialistic ideas. And back in those times when Kardec was around and he was trying to explain the basic spiritist concepts to people, it was something that was very present, the materialistic I guess line of thinking. So he clarifies that Spiritism speaks to those who believe in nothing at all and those who doubt it. So he tried to explain that some people would have their own religious faith, and they would say, look, what I believe is enough to make me live happy, so I don't need Spiritism. So he clarified to those people, he would say that if they said, I believe in the authority of the church, and that's why I accept everything that the church is telling me, then Spiritism would not help them, because they were not willing to look any further. But to those people that wanted to investigate the facts of life and why things happen in a certain way, or people that had a lot of questions, then of course Spiritism would help them understand like the concepts that Spiritism does clarify to us. But Spiritism would never force anyone into conviction, and he would never say, you need to believe this because the gospel according to Spiritism says that, or something like that. It's a philosophy based on reason, philosophy, and the moral aspects. So he just starts off clarifying that, and then he explains as well another concept that's very important in Spiritism that we all study, that we all understand, which is freedom of conscience. So Spiritism says that we are all free to think the way we prefer, the same way that we have free will, to do what we think we should do best. So he clarifies that main principle to the priest, saying, anyone that is a spiritist, they can think wherever way they like, because freedom of conscience is a consequence of the freedom of thought. And Spiritism clarifies that that's an attribute of any human being. So we understand that we're all free to think wherever way we want to. So if we need to question things, not a problem. And then he just explains that Spiritism would be in conflict with its own principles of charity and tolerance if it went against the freedom of thought and the freedom of conscience. So it would never impose its belief on anyone because of that, because it's respecting that whoever believes whatever they believe, it's their right to do so, until they learn, I guess, something different and they change their beliefs. So they just said that people should respect others' beliefs. So that was one aspect of the dialogue that Kardec clarified as well. Even if they think that they're right in their thoughts, as long as it's not leading to something bad, to some other people related to them, they should be respected in their own beliefs. So that being the main aspects of Spiritism to be considered. And then he clarifies as well that he had received, so I think Kardec started this discussion with the priest, and he made a point of explaining that in the book, because he received a lot of clergy people letters and approaches. So I think a lot of people back in the day in the church were trying to understand what was Spiritism, so they would go directly to him. And he said, he just explained, so he always had this line of conduct when he was speaking to people from the church. And whenever their question was about different points of the philosophy of the doctrine, like he says here, he would provide the explanations that were needed, but he would always avoid talking about the dogmas of the church, for example, that is nothing to do with Spiritism, because he understood that they had to make their own evaluations just with the information about Spiritism. He wasn't there to convince them. that, you know, a Catholic dogma was wrong or, you know, needed to be evaluated or anything like that. So he always explained what Spiritism clarified, and he then took that point of view of, I respect what you believe, and, you know, what you believe the church has to say about this. Yeah, so he summed up before even the priest started asking questions that Spiritism does not impose itself. So just reinforcing, it respects freedom of conscience. And it also understands that if anyone has a belief that it's superficial, for example, like he was saying, if someone, you know, might say, oh yeah, I believe this because the Bible says it so, or because my priest told me this, that would be like a superficial belief, and it would give the idea of real faith, but it's not real faith. And he explains that when you think about Spiritism, it actually lays out principles, and it helps people understand the reasons behind things. You know, when for example, in the Spirits book, there's all these questions and answers, and it explains about all the laws of life, basically the laws of nature, the law of progress, the law of love, the law of work, all the mechanisms that organize life, so you actually can understand, you know, what's behind each, I guess, fact of life or each happening. So that is giving people knowledge so they can have a reasonable, I guess, explanation for things. So it's faith within reason, and different to, I guess, other faiths that might just impose themselves. Spiritism is a bit different. So he mentioned that those who accept its Spiritists' principles, it's because they find them to be rational. So that was the scientific movement, I guess, behind the main people that were studying Spiritism back then, and they were part of the Spiritist Society of France as well. Like all the studies that they were conducting, all the people who considered themselves Spiritists, they were actually going through this line of thinking. And he also says that in no way they were going to trouble themselves with those who were not of our opinion or the Spiritist opinion, because that was a struggle between the church and Spiritism. If there was a struggle, like he said, you know, he was answering all these questions because he was getting all these questions from different people from the church. He said the Spiritists were not the ones who caused it. So we are not being troubled by these differences at all. So I loved just how he opened it, and he just laid it all out and was like, okay, now, do you have any questions? And then, okay, we're going to go through the first question. Do you have anything to add, Fla?
Kardec in this book over and over, he keeps saying he's not there to change people's mind. You know, he's not there to satisfy people's curiosity. If you want to know more about the doctrine of Spiritism, you have to study. And it is about that. You know, I think he's, again, in a sense, you know, he's not there to change the priest's mind. You know, like he's not there to change. It's only going to understand Spiritism if he studies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Kardec, puts very clear there all the time, saying, you have your beliefs, these are my beliefs. You are happy to try to understand more about my beliefs. But then it's a matter, and I think he puts there very clear, it's like it's a decision, you know, yeah. But don't discuss or don't condemn something
that you don't
know about it.
Yeah.
And I think that he's, in a way, over and over keeps saying that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's exactly what we start off in the first question. So the first question was, so the priest went, okay, so if the church sees this rise of this new doctrine or philosophy and believe its principles are condemnable according to the church's conscience, do you question the church's right to discuss and fight them? and to caution all the faithful, like the church followers, against what is regarded as an error. So, of course, he attacks Kardec a little bit. It's like, oh, we need to warn people because, Spiritism is something like back then, I guess they used to say that Spiritism was something from the devil. So Kardec has a very long answer to that. But basically he starts saying, look, in no way Spiritism would ever question people's right to question anything. But the way that things have been handled by the church is by causing slander and offending people that are of a Spiritist faith and misrepresenting the Spiritist philosophy because they don't even know it. So he basically said, yeah, the doctrine was undeservedly and maliciously misrepresented by some of the church members. And then he says, he gives a lot of examples. He questions a lot of those things, saying, for example, would you think it's right for an employer to persecute an employee because they had a Spiritist belief? Or would you agree that it's not correct for a priest to tell a wife to leave their husband because their husband is Spiritist, or the other way around? Or do you not think it's unfair to threaten an employee that they're going to lose their job because they were Spiritists? So this is basically what the church's representatives have been doing. And he questions that. So he's like, haven't they caused enough problems? Tell me, Reverend, is that fair treatment? Like, do you think the way that they're treating the Spiritists is fair? And then he finishes saying, have Spiritists answered any of those situations with insult? An insult? Wrong with wrong? No, they have applied calm and moderation. Public awareness has already absolved them of being the aggressors. So he was trying to show them that despite all these persecutions that the Spiritists back in the day were suffering, they were being taught by the spirits, with the Spirit's advice, to stay calm and do not, respond with ignorance, because everything that was happening was playing ignorance towards them. So they should be aware of that, and they should not become the aggressors in the situation. They should be the peacemakers, which is, I think, great advice if you think about, the moral law that we learn, all the moral values that we learn in Spiritism and other Christian faiths like Catholicism. Jesus would never tell someone to go ahead and persecute anyone. Quite the opposite. He used to tell everyone that we were all the same, we were all equals. So I think the church was kind of misrepresenting the main reason, the main representative of the Catholic faith, which was Jesus, I believe, in the Bible. So that's how they started. So basically he asks, so then the priest asks, any sane person would deplore such excesses, but the church shouldn't be held responsible for the abuses committed by some of its less informed members. So he was trying to justify, no, but those people who acted that way, they were clearly not representing the church, and they were being, they were just going through a little bit of excess. And then Allan Kardec responds, well, a lot of them were like high up in the church. So, for example, I had a pastoral letter of the Bishop of Algiers. There was a few orders, and then he mentioned that bishop in Barcelona who ordered the book burning, like we talked about in the last class. And he's like, well, if the church is telling people to tolerate Spiritists, but then they're also like having all this, misrepresentation and advertising that the publication of the Spiritist books is offensive, and saying all these defamatory writings against people who were of the Spiritist faith. It wouldn't be correct, I guess, to to proceed that way. And of course, the church was being represented because it was like people high up in the church that were actually saying all this. So he says that basically the way the church was conducting themselves, if they were talking to people who, for example, were part of those church communities and they decided to investigate Spiritism, and then they were basically telling them, oh, now you're going to burn in hell because you were reading that book, so you should not come here. So he was saying, basically, when they were systematically turning away Spiritists that returned to the church, they were actually forcing them to never go back to the church. So by being violent, attacking, and dealing with people in that way, they were actually making more people interested in knowing what Spiritism was all about, but they were not helping the growing numbers of people interested in Spiritism. And then he said as well that Spiritism was always a philosophical doctrine. It never called itself like a full religion back then. They considered Spiritism in that triple aspect. So most of it was the philosophical aspect, was the questioning, the trying to find answers, but within reason, the scientific method that Kardec applied. So he says that basically the church considered Spiritism an enemy, and he was like, oh, this is another faith. This is another religion, so it's an enemy. It's gonna, misguide people, and then it actually caused the problem of making Spiritism a dreaded enemy, whilst it shouldn't have been conducted that way. So he says, blunder and passion is not reason. So he said that everything that was happening, all the attitudes of the different clergy in the church back then were just going through, threatening, blunder, and passion. It was not considering all the aspects that Spiritism was trying to explain about life and, even love and respect to others, I guess, and, not holding prejudice. So that's how he finishes the question of the first part that we're reviewing tonight. Do you have anything else to add?
I think when you were talking, I just remember, like in the previous chapters, we studied when he answers to the critic. Yeah, and he mentions like to someone to criticize something, they have to have a full knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like people normally, like they make assumptions, but they have no knowledge of. So it's like you only allow, to be able to judge something when you actually know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that where in there with the priests and stuff, like priests saying, oh, people can, make, pass it on comments, but like based on what? Based
Mm-hmm.
in just what someone said, which might not be true.
Yeah,
So
we
it's
know
like
that
more
the
a
church,
speculation than
the church, back at that time, they had such political and even like economical influence on a lot of what was going on. So, a lot of it was, I think, to do with people's interests. So of course, like he was saying, like, what would a bishop benefit from burning books of another philosophy? Of course, they didn't. They just wanted to continue with whatever, personal interest maybe they had over their population. It wasn't with the intention of redempting people or helping people that they would do such things. So I think we have to understand that sometimes religion can lead people to do a number of things in the name of religion. We don't have to look too far before that. In Europe, they had all the persecutions as well, and the Inquisition. So I think the church was going through a lot of changes, and they were very afraid that new philosophies or new doctrines or religions were going to steal their people away, and then that would create all this I guess deter the personal interests, or maybe I don't know, the amount of money they would collect from the people who went to church. There could have been just like some other personal interests involved, because you wouldn't think that a follower of Jesus would have any of those attitudes towards, others, if they were really concentrating in the message that Jesus has left, for example. So both philosophies that we're talking about here are Christian. The church was theoretically representing the Christian faith, and so was Spiritism. But you look at the attitude, it's a bit different.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Kardec was good at, he was like, I call it bullshit.
Yep.
No, you're saying it doesn't make sense. He was always like, it has to be sensible. There has to be an explanation. There has to be reason. And like you said, yeah, if you don't know it, how can you criticize it?
Yeah.
If you really knew it, you would knew that all the moral teachings of Christ are very well explained over there. So, but yeah, I guess it was a bit threatening for the church back then. So
look, and if you think that, I suppose that even 100 years after his time, it was probably after then at least like back in Brazil, the Spiritism start to get more space. Until then, like I remember when Chico was in, he was like, do you remember there was a priest that he used to be on his case all the time? And he's like, so yeah, it took a long time for actually the general population that, didn't have the knowledge in Spiritism kind of see Spiritist people like, no, the devil, because that's where they believed, they were possessed.
And I think, again, it's ignorance, isn't it? People fear what they don't know.
Yeah.
Ignorance causes fear, and fear causes, I guess, makes people aggressive and defensive.
Yeah.
So, but, we learn as we learn. So this dialogue will continue. So this was just part one, because it's a very long dialogue, actually. So this was just part one. And Kardec then invites a free thinker that has joined as well the conversation. So it's not just the priest, it's a free thinker and the priest continuing the dialogue in the next class. So next week, we have our therapeutic meeting, and we will have the live transmission through Facebook. But if you guys want to join us again, the next session will be online here through Skype on the 1st of March. And we continue this dialogue, pages 126 to 130, and it will be Flavia.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. I'll just stop this now.